Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics here at Mid-America Christian University. I am here with our Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements COM 4603 Week 2 Asynchronous interview. It's asynchronous because we are working as best we can to bring content to the student, to the listener, to the audience, in a way that is not hampered by traditional barriers, by traditional time frames, and that's exciting stuff. And we are benefited by the digital culture we exist in, right? So contemporary society, our technologies, and so on afford us this possibility. We're very grateful for that. I want to take full advantage of it. I am joined in week 2 by our guest, Brian Neff. And just to recap some of Brian's recent accomplishments, Brian previously worked in outreach with the organization DFW Nerd Night, DFWNN, or Dallas Fort Worth Nerd Night. He created social media content, page, website design with and for the organization, as well as gathering participant data and creating effective outreach plans. He was also formerly a volunteer tabletop moderator, and I'm sure he could break into any one of those areas of experience at a given moment. But with that experience, I think an important takeaway for us, and some of your questions get at this in week 2, is that sometimes it's the free labor, right, that we are able to volunteer that can open the door and create those networked opportunities for future endeavors. Not to be confused with future endeavored. In terms of some additional work, Brian has some experience with game design and development and waitress games, including testing the merch and developing plans for clients. So clientele interaction, maintaining professional website, and that digital or perhaps even print portfolio. I guess we can find out momentarily. You can check out some of that work on waitressgames.net, and some projects that are included in Brian's work include Betrayal Legacy, right? Where he did some writing, design, and development, Seafall development, Charterstone, some playtesting, further development, Mountains of Madness, alert, all right, Cthulhu alert, writing, and this is no copyright problems here. This is educational fair use, and Feudum, right? So another project in development. So that is exciting. Sounds like a lot of multitasking and code switching, to use a common term. But at this point, I want to preface that in our Creating Social Media Presence and Culture Movements course, students have prepared in advance video questions in addition to longer interview protocols. I will note I've shared all of that content, your final drafts, as well as your video interview questions, with Mr. Neff, all right? So he has had exposure to it. He's watched all the videos, all right? But what we want to do, and we are communicating live from different coasts. One coast, one in the middle, Meatwich. But we want to be sensitive to his time, and so for that purpose, he has watched all of your videos. But we go ahead and we have drafted transcriptions of your questions, which I will reread. I'll try not to do any voice impressions for my own protection, and we will allow him to respond accordingly. So, without further ado, let me welcome Brian here to opening remarks. Brian, welcome. How are you?
Hi. I'm doing great. It's nice to sort of be on the East Coast where I'm an hour ahead and I can sort of drink my coffee before things get started. So it's great to be here. It was nice to meet all of your students, through their interview questions. I think all of them had some great questions, and I'm very happy to spend some time answering them.
Excellent. Well, we've got plenty of questions, that's for sure. Students are excited about your diverse experience in the gaming world. And so rather than monopolize the time, let me just jump in and explore a few of these questions. I want to start with one that's broad and gets at your professional experience. But what? Okay, let me jump to a question from one of our students, Kimberly, and she asked, "What first inspired you to get into games or video games? And what captured your attention and made you want to be in this career?"
So video games is a place that I have always felt very at home at. I did a lot of things before I sort of got on this career track, and I actually got into this career track relatively late. Most of the people who get into video games do so at 18 or 19, and I didn't actually start doing that sort of stuff until I was almost 25 or 26. But one of the things that inspired me to get into that sort of creative field was it was a little bit more constrained than doing something like writing novels or, you know, a lot of those more creative fields. I was constrained by sort of design documents, and there was a structure that felt really comfortable for me. And so in learning that sort of structure, I got to then sort of create that structure and learn how to manage people and, you know, work within teams and organizations and all of that sort of stuff. So the thing that really inspired me to get into it was seeing this very creative thing and being able to sort of put the pieces in place. So yeah, that's what inspired me to get into games in the first place.
There's a follow-up question from Kimberly, and it has to do with something you just mentioned, which is people management. And so speaking of learning how to work with different groups of people, you worked previously with the organization DFW Nerd Night, DFWNN. What was one of the things you took away from working with that group? What were among the memorable times you have from that experience? And maybe you can unpack the organization in a couple of words to preface.
Sure. So DFW Nerd Night is a charity organization that works with charities from all across the United States. And we throw board gaming parties, and people come and they donate money to the organizations that we've worked with. And we've worked with large organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters and smaller organizations like the Tarrant County Food Bank. So depending on, you know, who we're working with, we get a lot of people who come out and have been very, very generous in the past. And so, you know, if that is a thing that that you're interested in, you know, you can donate asynchronously if you would like to. So the website is dfwnerdnight.org or dfwnn.org. Either one of them works. But one of the most memorable things I took away from working with them was how to help and build a community. Community building is incredibly important, and especially for me in my field now, but being able to work with a charity organization that one of their main tenets is building a community so that people can sort of come together and do events was definitely a significant takeaway. And you know, I think the most memorable times that I have from working with DFW Nerd Night is throwing our once monthly board gaming extravaganzas where we would invite hundreds and hundreds of people to come to a place that was rented out to us, that was donated to us for free, and those people just being so generous in donating both their time and their money to sort of make a welcoming environment. So, you know, the community building portion of it is incredible.
This, you're talking about community building, and you're talking about some nonprofit work, some organizational work. But queuing in on this community building and volunteerism, let me transition to a question that we had from Megan. And she asks, do you feel that volunteering to help with career related events has given you an advantage in your field?
Oh, absolutely. Volunteerism, both professionally and for charity, are really great ways of building connections and sort of networking with people. One of the most important things that I do on a day-to-day basis is sort of expand the number of people that I know of and that know of me in my specific board gaming field, because so much of my career on a day-to-day basis is collaborating with people. And whether it's collaborating to find clients or collaborating on a specific project, or even being able to push work that I don't have time for or that I don't know how to do onto people that do, to make sure that the clients that I work with on a daily basis are happy and satisfied. A lot of that comes from volunteering, at either conventions or at these sort of charity parties, where people can come in and I can meet the professionals in my industry in a place that's a little bit less mercenary than trying to get them to, pay my bills for me. So,
can you describe what is a charity party? What is going on there?
So, at a lot of the larger events that I go to, specifically the largest event that we go to is called Gen Con. It's in Indiana, and it's a 100,000 person event. So it's very, very large. And one of the things that has become sort of a staple is every night of the 4 nights, they represent a different charity, and they invite people from different parts of the industry to come in and talk about, why charity is important, and also sort of give some free promotion to some products that they're doing. And those people donate products that are given away at the end of the night, or auctioned off, depending on how valuable the product is. So those are the sort of charity parties that I'm talking about.
Interesting. You've talked a lot already about networking and multitasking, and this brings to mind a great question from Michael, and feel like you can take it in any direction with your past experience. And that is, what challenges have you faced while doing your job? Can you expound on an example or two?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges that I think I face doing tabletop game development and tabletop game design is that the market, especially in the past couple of years, has become incredibly saturated. So finding a way to stand out and finding a way to make myself look desirable for clients and for potential customers is probably one of the biggest challenges that I face on a day-to-day basis. And so, finding ways to get my portfolio in front of people and get people to come to my website and get people to interact with me on social media is incredibly difficult, but also incredibly rewarding, because, I know that the work that I'm getting isn't because I'm the only person out there. It's because there are a lot of people out there, and people, for whatever reason, think that I am the best fit to do the job that they've given me.
You mentioned portfolio, and that's an important key term that we toss around in the new communication, media, and ethics major at MacU. And one of the challenges our students will face is now to comprise a digital media portfolio over the course of the degree. And this brings me to a question from Chris. All right, Chris had a unique question that. A digital portfolio is something we have worked on during my communication degree. What are some tips to creating a digital portfolio that grabs the attention of the viewer right away? So any tips on various portfolio experiences you have?
Yeah, there are 2 main tips that I think that I would give to answer this question. The first one is pretty simple. It's learn the tools that make a good portfolio. So if you're doing a digital portfolio, a video portfolio, learn the video editing tools that you need to be able to make that portfolio look good. Learn OBS and learn Audacity and all of those different tools, and a lot of those things that you can get for free, in order to sort of make your portfolio immediately look good. And it also makes you look incredibly professional whenever you use those sorts of tools in order to put a little polish on it. And then the second tip for creating a digital portfolio is go deep instead of wide. Instead of trying to showcase every single piece of digital media that you've ever put out there, highlight the ones that you think are the best and that best highlight your skills. The people who are going to come and see your portfolio aren't going to want to spend an hour on your webpage or an hour looking through your physical portfolio in order to try and find the gems of why you're best for the job. So part of curating your digital portfolio is picking the things that best represent your skills and best communicate those skills to whoever's looking into your portfolio.
Talking about, you just mentioned doing things that don't go deep, or rather go deep, don't go wide. Do those things that perhaps excite you the most or you get the most out of. This reminds me of a conversation we've had in this course to open things up. We've been reading Scott Goodson's Uprising, among a few other select texts, and Goodson writes about passion. And I'm a big advocate of finding your passion so that it can resonate. And in terms of passion, this fits to some degree with the question from Izel, who asks, as a young entrepreneur, is this area something you love doing as a profession, or is it simply a way to make quote unquote quick money? I don't know if anything creative. I can think of a couple of things in terms of quick money these days, but I don't know if any of them are sustainable.
Well, I mean, to answer that question, if I'm doing this to make quick money, I'm doing a really, really bad job at it. No, I do this because I love doing it. In fact, like I've worked in a number of other fields. Sort of like I said, I got to this relatively late, and I think a lot of those other fields paid significantly better. But doing games is something that I feel passionate about doing, for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, depending on, what my day looks like. And I think that's incredibly important, to be able to do something that, it may not be the perfect thing for you every single moment of every single day, but it's something that you're good at, you can get into, and you're passionate about. And so, that may not mean doing something that you love doing and is exciting 100% of the time, but, it's something that you care about the end result of. And I very much do care about the end result of the games that I'm making. When games finally come out 6 months to a year after I'm finished working on them, it's exciting to see people sort of sit down and open it for the first time and see just a lot of joy and delight on their faces. So
you mentioned something there, and this is a great time to pivot into more of your contemporary work and contemporary passion, and that is in that realm of tabletop game design. And so let's shift to some of the questions relating specifically to the contemporary era, right, of Nefdom. Maybe one of the best ways to start is to define our key terms. Will asks a good question, important question right off the top. What are waitress games? And can you talk about how you've been involved in that area of content development?
Sure. Waitress Games is a development studio that I and a very good friend of mine, J.R. Honeycutt, founded in 2013. And for a very long time, for about 3 years, it was something that we did on the side, and it was sort of a hobby thing that we did. And we finally ended up getting enough clients and working our portfolio up enough that both of us could quit the jobs that we were doing at that time and go full time. So Waitress Games is the design studio that both of us work under. And most of the time, the way that we function is we take other people's games that they are either in the starting or intermediary stages of, and we develop them so that they can sort of become marketable products. We have an in-house graphic designer that we use, as well as an in-house artist who creates all of the art for these various games if art isn't already there. I am our in-house writer and developer, so anything that sort of has to do with world building or narrative writing or anything like that is something that I do, as well as sort of the systems work to make sure that that nothing inside of the game is terribly broken. And then that's what Waitress Games is. And so if you would like to see some of the games that we've worked on, you can go to, as Dr. Castleberry said earlier, you can go to waitressgames.net, and that has sort of our digital portfolio and all of the games that we've worked on. And so you can see sort of our artwork and our designs and the things that we've put out there.
They say that every artist hides himself or herself in their own work. And this brings me back to a question that Chris had in our course. And he asked, what was a favorite tabletop game growing up? And how does it compare to a game you have helped to create, if any?
Oh, boy. My favorite game growing up, my favorite tabletop game growing up. This is one of my favorite stories because it shows sort of how full circle all of this stuff can end up being. One of my favorite tabletop games growing up was a game called Betrayal at House on Haunted Hill, which is a highly narrative game that I love because it's all about creating stories. And one of the games that Waitress Games just finished working on last year was a game called Betrayal Legacy, which is that exact same game, sort of taken from how it was 10 or 15 years ago, brought up to some more modern design standards and rewritten with a brand new narrative. And so I got to work on one of the games that I sort of idolized growing up with one of the people who originally created it 15 years ago. And it was sort of a career-defining moment to get to work with him and be able to work on one of the games that was my favorite growing up.
You mentioned that you have a role, you sometimes often take the lead, whether it's narrative development, world building, all right, another important term in your field and in the writing field and content creation field. Can you talk a little bit about your process first of all, how you approach maybe development, the writing phase, etc. And then Aaron has a follow-up question of how do you deal with writer's block when and if it arises?
Sure. There are a number of methods for writing and creating a framework to write different worlds and different stories. And there are a lot of very good books have to deal with that deal with sort of creating writing frameworks. And if you want to check any of those out, there is a professor by the name of Robin Laws who publishes a number of good books on creating different writing frameworks. And basically what he says is you shouldn't try and create a world or create characters whole cloth, because a lot of them will try and come off, or a lot of them will end up coming off as fake if you do that. And so instead what you should do is you should create a framework and build the world based on that. You should ask interesting questions about characters and ask interesting questions about the world, and sort of write those things down in order to create touchstones about why other people will find your world and your characters interesting. And so a lot of the times when I'm dealing with world building and narrative development and things like that. What we try and do is we try and ask those questions and create frameworks to create those worlds and characters. And then to answer Aaron's question about writer's block, it has a lot to do with the difference between motivation and discipline. A lot of people who do this as a hobby, and there are a lot of people who create games and write novels and do a lot of that stuff as a hobby, and that's, you know, it's great that those people do it. They do it because they're motivated to do those things, and they only do it when they're motivated to do those things. In order to do this stuff professionally, you have to establish a professional discipline. It means writing a lot and setting times to write and setting targets and, you know, doing a lot of the sort of professional quotas that you hear about whenever you hear about professional writers. And that's sort of what I mean whenever I talk about the professional writing discipline. And so the way to get around writer's block is to lean on the discipline rather than the motivation. You know, talking about creating those frameworks and asking those questions and doing that sort of stuff is how to get around writer's block. Nothing is going to be perfect the first time that you do it, and trying to write the perfect sentence or, you know, create the perfect character or create the perfect game mechanic or anything like that simply isn't going to be the case. And so the way that you get around that sort of analysis paralysis whenever you're dealing with that sort of stuff is just to get something on the page. Write anything as long as it moves you forward, and eventually you'll get yourself out of that rut.
Mm-hmm. Nice. As a matter of fact, an important through line, I think, to make right here is that in this course, our key focus is on the art and the craft of interviewing, and we're developing interview protocols, and we're working through a classical pattern of drafting. All right, and they're one of the myths, one of the great media myths, and this is why media is so persuasive to audiences, is that we feel like we deitize essentially these people that come on television or streaming or what have you as you know, they're the gods of the Ethernet, right? They are perfect. They speak perfectly. They look perfect. And, you know, the reality behind that is that a lot of work goes into it. I've made this point of reference in several of my digital lectures in the past, but for, you know, for every frame of film or, you know, TV you watch, you know, think about what is outside that frame. I mean, there's 360 degrees of production design teams and so on, computer generated imagery, and we're just talking media here, but the point trying to make in connection is the significance of asking good questions, writing good questions. You're practicing it, and you're not a journalist. And I think that is a significant point to make. You know, there can easily be that illusion of, oh, well, this is an important skill, but I'm not going to be a journalist, or I'm not going into broadcasting, or I'm not going to blank. But we will use these skills. They're valid, that we will reuse them repetitiously throughout our numerous careers in various directions. And so question writing never goes out of vogue. You've heard it here, folks. Speaking of those skill sets, I just want to make sure we get a plug before I forget. If I'm not mistaken, you're a communication major, right? Can you speak to the value or utility of communication major, or some of the maybe even setbacks or challenges, or how it can, what types of professional roles people can fulfill with a comm degree?
Absolutely. So for context, I graduated with a degree in communications from the University of Oklahoma. So, you know, I was at one point relatively local to MacU. But there's all sorts of things that you can do with a communication degree. And a lot of those things fall into media. But there's also sort of a much broader stretch of things that you can do with a communication degree. Communication, sort of at its core, is how to effectively talk with, whether it be a group of people or a singular other person. And that's always going to be useful in every single field. If you go into business, communication is going to teach you how to do public speaking in a boardroom. If you go into media, communication is going to have to, or if you go into journalism, communication is going to teach you, like Dr. Castleberry said, how to write effective questions and how to figure out, how to best communicate a story to people. If you go into a creative field, communication has a lot to offer. So a comm degree has a ton of stuff that is going to be useful to you in just about any field that you can get into, both professionally and personally.
Let me draw back on something you mentioned a minute ago. You were talking about personal discipline and how you must approach that as a content creator, as a professional writer. Michael asked a great question in his video entry, and that is, what issues at work, right, in your field, could have an adverse effect on completing a project on time? So can you talk about some of the challenges of completion, or, in that realm or profession, what are some challenges that you face?
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest challenges, at least professionally, in game design is deciding when you're done. And that's an interesting thing to sort of think about during the design process, because whenever you are sitting down at a table and writing or editing, and really in any creative field, the thing that you're working on can always be better. I can always put 10 more hours into a game that I'm designing and, make it a little bit better, or, put 100 more hours into a world that I'm building, or a novel that I'm writing, or something like that, and edit it to make it sound a little bit better or a little bit more cohesive or anything like that. But eventually there's diminishing returns on those sorts of things. And so one of the issues that I have, because I've become a perfectionist with this sort of stuff, is deciding when it's done enough, when it is good enough to sort of put out there. Because again, like Dr. Castleberry mentioned, the only thing that people are going to see is the end result of that product, and they're not going to see, most people are not going to see a lot of the work that goes into it. And so deciding when those diminishing returns are enough to put it out there and let people see it is one of the biggest issues that I have when working on creative content.
Kind of like writing a course. You never know what's going to go right or wrong with it, especially if the next one's coming down the pipe. You mentioned, all right, we're talking about challenges here and deciding when you're done. And this leads to a great question from John. He asks, rather than challenges, about restrictions. What restrictions have you faced in gaming development, if any?
So there are a lot of restrictions that come about, especially when you're working with clients, because they generally control a lot of what is going to end up getting put out there. And so a lot of the restrictions that I have placed on me are clients saying, hey, we want things to look like this. We want to appeal to this age group. This is our target market. And so a lot of the creative process for me is tailoring stuff that has to go towards that market. And so we have a lot of people that come to us and say, hey, we're marketing towards people under the age of 14. And so we have to make sure that our writing tailors to that. We have to make sure that we don't use harsh language, that we don't use references that would sort of get us in hot water with that target market. And even on the design side, we have to make sure that the game is simple enough that it can be played by that audience, or if we're targeting a market that is, 15 and up or something like that. We have to make sure that the game is complex enough that people will find enjoyment of it and be able to sort of express skill inside of the game. So yeah, there's all sorts of restrictions that get placed on game development, and not the least of which is time constraints and things like that. But a lot of those sort of restrictions come from our clients.
This speaking of shifting demographics, considering audiences, right, and the compromise that comes into content creation in general, I bet a lot of our students tend to think of the tabletop gaming industry in very, no pun intended, monopolized fashion, right? You think about these large companies, the Milton Bradleys, the others. It's like I saw one in my head suddenly slipping.
Hasbro is the one.
Hasbro was it came to mind. But can you talk about maybe more of the niche market that you've appealed to in the past, how that's different, and what's an example of something? I'm even recalling one particular game that was written with an audience in mind for maybe outdoor food truck venues.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that we're working on is for an independent market. So one of the things that has happened in tabletop games in the past 10 years is this explosion of independent companies and independent games that's been happening. You are right that 10 or 15 years ago there were probably 3 or 4 big companies that really sort of monopolized the market. There was Milton Bradley, there was Hasbro, there was a European company called Asmodee, and then there was another American company called Fantasy Flight. And those were basically the 4 companies that you had to go through if you wanted to get a game published. But now there's hundreds of small publishers that happen everywhere because that market, became so diverse. About 10 or 15 years ago, the only people that played games were families, and so you had Milton Bradley and Hasbro, and you had sort of middle-aged middle-class people who would play the games from Fantasy Flight and Asmodee. And so since many more people have gotten into tabletop games, there has been sort of an explosion in that market. And so I've worked mainly with a lot of the smaller publishers to sort of get their stuff up on par and get their production design up on par with the larger companies. And so, generally we'll work with people who are only making 20,000 games and, putting those out on the market. And, we encounter all sorts of content. Like you said, we made the game Food Truck Destruction Derby, which is a game about food trucks sort of crashing into each other and making big explosions. And that was for a company that ended up only printing 10,000 units of that game. And I've also worked on horror games that are for an audience that skews a little bit older. And so we can put, some sort of darker, more cerebral content into that sort of stuff.
So collectors, sounds like a collector's item, right?
Yeah.
Only 10,000 copies. Now I need to go buy 5, right? It's going to go up in value.
Perhaps sometime in the future.
I like that. Food Truck Destruction Derby, folks. There are those of you that thrive in the hipster scene, the denizens of metropolitan areas. Go check that. Take a Food Truck Destruction Derby to your nearby, Friday evening soiree. Impress your friends and that sort of thing. But to get us back on a serious point, and I hope I didn't interrupt you there. Correct me if I'm wrong, because this is what I feel like I'm hearing, and this is beautiful. You described 10 to 15 years ago, the market had reached a point of monopolization. All right, so corporate overlords have taken over. Everything is homogenized for a specific broad demographic of, family friendly outlets. And yet now we see opportunity. Can we, correlation does not equal causation, but can we, is there a link between our accessibility and connectivity through digital channels and internet culture to allow this small market to resurge?
There's absolutely a causation that happens there. One of the platforms that started popping up, one of the digital platforms that started popping up about 10 years ago is a platform called Kickstarter that we use all the time. And Kickstarter is a funding platform where content creators can go and put up a project on Kickstarter and invite people to fund that project in order to get something back. And so a lot of times Kickstarter is used so that I can put a board game up on Kickstarter and I can have 5,000 people come and give me $20, and that's enough to print 10,000 or 20,000 copies of that game. And so the internet and social media and all of that stuff has absolutely helped with building an audience that is interested in things that 10 or 15 years ago would have been considered relatively niche. And also the internet being able to connect Facebook to Kickstarter to Instagram to YouTube and all of those different platforms being interconnected has helped sort of collate and create a Venn diagram of those audiences that are all interested in the things that you can put out there.
You mention in your professional description, sometimes your role is developer, sometimes your role is content creator, maybe you're doing some web work. Can you talk about a little bit of experience where you worked on the marketing end of things? Is that something?
Sure. Yeah. I have done a little bit of marketing. It's definitely not the thing that I'm best at or most comfortable with, but it's one of the hats that you have to wear in a small industry. And a lot of marketing comes down to identifying what your target market is, identifying your audience, identifying who finds your content appealing, and being able to deliver that content to them through whatever streams they're using. And so a lot of the times whenever I'm dealing with a marketing channel, I'm trying to discover, is this product that I have appealing to 14-year-olds? If so, we need to try and market through a channel that a lot of 12 to 14-year-olds use. So we'll market through YouTube and through Instagram and through a lot of those things. And if we're skewing a little bit older, people who are 20 to 25 or beyond, we tend to target advertisements on Facebook and sort of those larger social media platforms that more people are on. So as far as marketing goes, a lot of it is identifying a target market, identifying a target demographic, and figuring out how to communicate with that target demographic in a way that is effective.
I think in dealing with a constant challenge we face as comm majors, as students of communication in its interconnected fields like media studies, public relations, television studies, social media studies, and so on, is that there is an outside perception that that there can be a kind that it's limited, or that it's a fluff degree, when in fact more people are spending more time on digital platforms and social media avenues than ever before, and yet we're facing digital an uncanny valley, if you will, between digital literacy and perhaps what's coined digital illiteracy. To clarify, one of our strengths we're trying to promote in the comm major is an understanding that you're not only tasked with, exploring and expanding your communication potential, but there is intersection most likely between not only social media literacy, but also marketing, writing in various forms and styles, as well as brand management. Has that been your experience, or would you contest that type of assertion?
Absolutely not. That has been my experience. Almost 100% is the things that I have learned and used in my communication experience have translated into fields that I would not have expected them to at all. Part of working with Waitress Games was sort of creating and managing a company from the ground up, and part of that was brand management, and part of that was marketing, and part of that was stuff that I had no formal education in, and so I had to lean a lot on the stuff that I learned during my comm career in order to sort of muddle through that portion of the things that I didn't know how to do. And a comm degree, and especially sort of formal education in how to communicate and digital literacy, was incredibly important in expanding the things that I had to learn in order to make my business successful.
Are you suggesting you had to fake passion in certain areas until you understood how to master that?
Absolutely. There is, and like you said, marketing is an incredibly important thing, and it's not something that it's not something that I excel at, but it's something that I am competent in, and connecting it to something that I am passionate about makes me want to do it. And it also sort of ties back into that professional discipline, which is being able to recognize that that's something that I have to do in order to make the things that I want to do better.
Mm-hmm. I love that response, and it's a perfect segue to a final question from the students that I want to present.
Sure.
And this again comes from Aaron. You have talked to us about I feel like it's been thoroughly teased out, the significance of networking in your field. You've described it from a marketing standpoint, from a personal standpoint, from a small business standpoint. You've described it from a social standpoint. But as a follow-up to that question of the importance of networking in your field, what would you suggest for those students or future communicators, right, young entrepreneurs, whatever, that for those of us that might not be naturals when it comes to networking? So any advice for us, any tricks of the trade that you could pass on to our students?
Sure. I am not a natural when it comes to networking. In fact, until very recently, I was bad at networking, and part of it is practice. Part of it is going out and if you're going to make a fool of yourself, making a fool of yourself a little bit, which is definitely something that I've done in professional settings, at least a couple of times. So the first tip is practice. But then sort of to get a little bit more in the weeds about it, the second tip that I have is, if you are not comfortable talking, to strangers, one of the things that you can do is you can let them do most of the talking. A lot of networking is listening and remembering, and making people feel connected to you. And so whenever you're networking, ask questions, especially about the things that you're interested in. Do you have experience in this thing that I am interested in? How have you worked in that sort of things? A lot of the interview questions that you're learning in this course are also going to be very good networking questions. Especially in an informal environment, being able to say, hey, I'm very interested in the thing that you're doing. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about it? And then listening and retaining that information is going to be one of the most valuable networking skills that you can train. Because one of the ways that people are going to remember you is if you remember them. So being able to come back, a month or 2 months later and say, oh, hey, I remember you. You're the person that was working on X, and you are very good at that thing, and you have experience that I found useful. Thank you so much for talking to me. Is something that's going to treat you very well as part of networking.
What a fantastic bit of personal advice that's also professional advice. Excellent feedback there, and really, from week 1 to week 2, sharp improvement of student questions. I feel like we are gaining momentum through that repetition. We want to get to a point of confidence and excelling. We are practicing ourselves into increased confidence and experience through this course. It's why we tackle it on a weekly basis. And so a lot of that. I mean, I'm running the course, and I know Brian, and I'm over here. I'm taking notes. I'm filling up sticky notes. I want to know more about all these things. So a sign that we have gained a lot of valuable input from Brian. Thank you so much for taking time out of your professional schedule to join us and inform us about your experiences. Any final takeaways you have? Not necessarily, don't feel like you've got to make the stump speech here, but anything you want to plug, anything you want to advertise, tell us about. Where can we learn more about you, your company? We've mentioned the website, but final thoughts there on any topic.
Sure. One of the things, one of the places that you can find me is that website, which is waitressgames.net. And I think to sort of create a plug right here at the end is, even if you are not interested, in sort of Monopoly or family games or anything like that, is I would encourage you to go out and play some tabletop games. It's a really great way to get some face-to-face interaction. And if you just go online and Google hobby game store, there's going to be one around you. You can go in, you can tell, the person that's working there something that you're interested in, and they'll be able to hook you up with a game that you'll probably find enjoyable. It's a lot broader and a lot more, more diverse than anyone who is not in the industry could imagine that it is. We have giant games, we have small games, we have complex games, we have games that are played at parties. There are games that you can play by yourself, games that you can play with 80 people. So it's an incredible place to be. It's an incredibly fun way to spend some of your time, and I would encourage you to do it.
Excellent. So much better than Candy Crush, right? You'll look much cooler than people always like sneaking their candy games. Not to hate on it, too much. It's just funny. It's just observation. Just people are funny. Once again, I do want to thank. I'm thinking of Brian. Thank Brian for joining us. This has been exceptional. I hope it's been as valuable to him as it will be for our purposes. Again, this will be archived on our YouTube page, which you can click to subscribe and get that content before it's ever uploaded to D2L, right? These things take time. Anyway, want to thank Brian again. It's been a real treat. And for those of you in the course, we're excited to wrap up the Asynchronous interview number 2, and we'll be back next week with fresh content for you all. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.